She said it the way you'd mentioned traffic. Casual, barely looking up from her phone. Dad, we need you to stay home this Sunday. We're doing a small family thing at our place, and honestly, it would just be easier. Easier. I turned the word over in my mind for the rest of the evening. Easier for whom? I'm 63 years old. I built furniture with my hands for 31 years, ran my own shop out of a warehouse on Route 9, put 2 kids through college without borrowing a dime. I know what hard looks like, what I didn't know. What I still hadn't figured out, even after my daughter got married 8 years ago, was how I'd become the inconvenient one. My son-in-law never liked me. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it the way you'd state a weather pattern. It's been there from the beginning, that particular coolness he has when I walk into a room. Not hostile exactly, just measured, like he's always doing a quiet calculation about whether I'm worth the effort that day. My daughter loves him. That's the plain truth, and I've never tried to argue with it. She chose him. She built a life with him. They have a house in Fairfax County, a good neighborhood, and 2 kids I love more than anything left in this world. So I kept my mouth shut for years. I came when invited, left when the evening wound down, brought a bottle of wine and helped clear the dishes. I was, by any reasonable measure, a good guest in my own daughter's home. But this was different. It's Grandma June's 85th birthday, my daughter said. My mother-in-law is flying in from Portland. His whole side of the family is coming. It'll be crowded, and you know how he gets when things get crowded. I knew how he got, yes. And besides, she said, her voice softening a little, like she was trying to make the words land gently, it's really their moment. You understand, right, Dad? I said I understood. I drove home that night on I-66 with the radio off. It was the kind of October evening where the sky turns that bruised purple just after sunset, and everything feels a little too quiet. I thought about my late wife, my daughter's mother, and what she would have said about all this, probably something sharp and accurate that I would have tried to talk her down from. She had a radar for disrespect that I always admired and occasionally feared. I went home and sat in the kitchen for a while, just sat there. I'm not a man who wallows. Ask anyone who's known me longer than a week, but I'm also not made of stone, and that night I let myself feel it. The particular sting of being managed by someone who came from you, who carries your mother's eyes and your father's stubborn chin, and who has somehow learned to see you as a complication to be organized around. The following Sunday I did not go to Fairfax County. I went to the hardware store instead, bought some sandpaper I didn't need, came home and worked on a rocking chair I'd been restoring for 3 months. It was good work. Quiet, methodical, the kind of work that keeps your hands busy while your mind does what it needs to do. I made myself a real dinner that night. Pork chops, roasted potatoes, green beans from the can, because I didn't feel like pretending. I ate at my own kitchen table in my own house, and I will tell you honestly, it was a strange kind of peace. Lonely, but clean. My daughter didn't call that evening. She called Monday morning, and she was bright and cheerful in the way people are when they want to believe something went fine. How was your weekend, Dad? Like she'd forgotten what she'd done. Or more likely, like she hoped I had. Quiet, I said. Good. There was a pause. The party went really well, she told me. Grandma June was so happy. I'm glad, I said. And I meant it. Whatever my feelings about the situation, I had no quarrel with an 85-year-old woman being happy on her birthday. We talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular and then said goodbye. I let a few days pass. I'm old enough to know that the first thing you feel is rarely the thing you should act on. Anger is a fire that burns off its own smoke eventually, and what's left underneath is usually a lot more useful. What was left underneath, in my case, was clarity. I pulled out the folder I kept in the filing cabinet in my office, a cabinet my son-in-law had once called charmingly old-fashioned, in a tone that made it clear he meant the opposite. In that folder were documents I hadn't looked at in over a year. My will, my accounts, the deed to my house, the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts, and my life insurance policy. I'd updated the will 3 years ago after my wife passed. I'd left everything split evenly between my daughter and my son. My son lives in Colorado now, teaches high school history, calls every Sunday without fail. He's never once made me feel like an inconvenience. I sat with those documents for a long time. Then I called my attorney. His name is a man I've trusted since we were both young, and neither of us knew what we were doing yet. We've been through a lot together over the decades. My wife's estate, a business dispute with a vendor back in 2009, small things and large ones. He picked up on the second ring. "I need to come in," I said. "I want to talk through some changes." He didn't ask questions over the phone. That's one of the things I appreciate about him. I went in Thursday afternoon. We sat in his office on the second floor of an old building downtown. Real wood paneling, nothing flashy. And I told him what I was thinking. Not out of spite, I want to be clear about that. Spite is for people who haven't figured out yet that it costs more than it's worth. What I wanted was to make sure my intentions were clearly documented, to ensure that the people who showed up, who actually showed up, in the full sense of the word, were the ones who would benefit from a lifetime of my work. We made adjustments. It took about an hour. I left feeling lighter than I'd expected. That same week, I also called my financial advisor and reviewed the beneficiary designations on my accounts. Some of these don't pass through a will. They go directly to whoever's named. That matters more than most people realize until it's too late to realize it. I didn't tell my daughter any of this. There was no reason to. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a message. It was just me, at 63, doing what any sensible person ought to do, making sure the paperwork reflects the reality of the relationships, not just the assumption of them. Life continued. The weeks moved in their ordinary way. I had Thanksgiving at my son's place in Colorado. We drove up into the mountains one afternoon, and he pointed out a trail he'd hiked in September. It was cold, and the light was thin and gold, and my grandson ran ahead of us on the path, while my son and I walked behind him, the way fathers and sons do when they've gotten past the need to fill every silence. It was one of the best days I'd had in years. My daughter called on Thanksgiving morning. We talked for 20 minutes. She sounded happy. I was glad for that, genuinely. Whatever had happened, she was still my daughter, and I still loved her, and I still loved her in that old, unreasonable way that doesn't negotiate with itself. She didn't mention the October party. I didn't bring it up. Then came December. I got a call on a Tuesday night, just after 8 o'clock. I was watching a nature documentary, something about migratory birds in the Pacific Northwest, and when I saw her number, I turned down the volume and answered. "Dad." Her voice was different, tight. The cheerful surface was gone, and what was underneath it was something close to panic. "Dad, I need to talk to you about something. Something serious." I turned off the television entirely. "What is it?" She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing in that shallow, controlled way she used to breathe as a teenager when she'd done something wrong and was trying to figure out how to begin. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to know first that I did not know. Tell me what happened." She told me. What had happened was this: my son-in-law, and here I'll ask you to let the plain facts speak for themselves, had been quietly pulling together financial information over the past several months, specifically mine, account numbers, social security information, the details of a savings account I'd had for decades, the one I'd mentioned offhandedly over dinner the previous spring when we'd been talking about interest rates. I don't know exactly how he obtained what he'd obtained. I'm still not entirely sure I want to know. What I do know is that someone, and ultimately it came back to him, had attempted to open a line of credit using my information and a mailing address that wasn't mine. It had been flagged. I have credit monitoring. I set it up after a data breach a few years back, the kind of thing you do when you're old enough to have seen enough cautionary tales. The alert came to my phone at 3 a.m. on a Saturday, 2 weeks before my daughter called me. I'd been awake for it because I don't sleep the way I used to. I saw it, read it, and then did something I suspect most people wouldn't have done at that hour. I called the bank's fraud line. Then I sat down and wrote out a timeline of everything I could remember. Then I called my attorney in the morning. I had already filed a report with the Federal Trade Commission. I had already contacted my bank. I had already, on the advice of my attorney, sent a certified letter to the address listed on the fraudulent credit application. By the time my daughter called me that Tuesday in December, I had been dealing with this for 2 weeks in silence. "Dad," she said. Are you there? I'm here. He says it was a mistake. He says he was trying to help you. Something about consolidating, I don't even. Dad, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to say. I believed her that she hadn't known. My daughter has her faults, and some of them have hurt me. But she is not a person who would sit across from me at a holiday table while her husband was using my identity to open credit lines. That particular coldness is not in her. I know you didn't know, I said. She started crying, not the performed kind. The real kind. The kind that's almost embarrassing in its rawness. I don't know what he was thinking. I don't understand it. He won't even explain it properly. He keeps saying it was for your benefit and sweetheart. I kept my voice even. It wasn't difficult, actually. I'd had 2 weeks to feel the things I needed to feel about this. Right now I was mostly just tired. You don't need to explain him to me. I need you to understand something. What? What? This has already been reported to the FTC, to my bank, to my attorney. If there's a prosecution, I won't be the one driving it. These things take on a life of their own once they're in the system. I want you to hear that from me directly, so you're not blindsided. The silence on the other end was the loudest thing I'd heard in months. Dad, she finally said, what does that mean for? She stomped. For what? For him. For us. I thought carefully about what to say next. Not because I didn't know what I thought, but because I wanted to say it correctly. I have found, at 63, that most of the things we regret saying are the ones we said while we were still at the boiling point, rather than the simmering one. I love you, I said. That doesn't change. You are my daughter, and that is not a conditional thing. But I will not pretend that what happened here is a small thing, or that it didn't happen, or that the person you chose to build your life with didn't do it. She was quiet. The decisions that come from this are yours to make, I continued. About your marriage, about your household, about what you do next. I can't make those for you. But I think you already knew things about him that you might not have been willing to look at directly. Another silence. Longer this time. Yeah, she said softly. I think maybe I did. We talked for another half hour. Not about the fraud, not about the legal details. About her. About the kids. About what she needed and who she could lean on. I told her she could come stay at my house if she needed space to think. I told her she didn't have to figure anything out tonight. By the time we hung up, something between us had shifted, not broken, but reconfigured into something more honest than it had been in years. That's the only way I know how to describe it. I won't tell you everything that happened afterward because some of it is still unfolding and some of it belongs to my daughter, not to me. What I can tell you is that my son-in-law is facing consequences that have nothing to do with my personal feelings about him. The system I put in motion 2 weeks before that phone call had already established its own momentum. Financial fraud of this kind is not a private matter between family members. It is a federal matter. And the people who handle federal matters are not interested in whether there are grandchildren involved or whether Christmas is coming. My daughter is still in Fairfax County. She's still in the house. She's been talking to a lawyer of her own. And whatever she decides to do with her marriage is something I've made my peace with, not controlling. The kids came to stay with me for a long weekend in January. We made waffles both mornings. My granddaughter wanted to help with everything, cracking the eggs, pouring the batter, operating the iron like it was a spaceship control panel. My grandson sat at the counter and ate 6 waffles in a row without comment, which at 9 years old I found deeply admirable. The rocking chair is finished, by the way. I put it on the back porch and have sat in it nearly every evening since. It's a good chair. Solid, well-balanced. The kind that doesn't rock unless you want it to. I've thought a lot over these past months about what I should have done differently. If I'd spoken up sooner. If I'd drawn clearer lines earlier, if I'd let my daughter know plainly and without softening it, what her husband's behavior cost me, not just emotionally, but in terms of how I saw myself and how I saw us, I don't know that any of it would have changed what happened. Some things move toward their ending regardless of what you do along the way. But I know this. The Sunday I was told to stay home, I stayed home. I didn't make a scene. I didn't call and demand an explanation. I went to the hardware store, came home, worked with my hands, ate my dinner. I handled it quietly, and then I went to my filing cabinet. And then I called my attorney. Quiet is not the same as passive. Soft-spoken is not the same as weak. I learned that from my father, who never raised his voice in his life and was one of the most formidable men I ever knew. You don't have to be loud to be serious. You just have to mean what you do. I meant every last bit of it. If there's anything I'd say to a man in a similar situation, sitting alone in his kitchen on a Sunday night, feeling the particular ache of being made to feel like a guest in the life of someone he raised, it's this: your dignity is not up for vote. It doesn't require their approval to exist, and the quiet, careful, legal steps you take to protect yourself are not revenge. They're just responsibility. The kind you've been practicing your whole life without calling it anything. The birds are back in the yard now that it's warming up. I've started keeping the feeder full again. I sit in the rocking chair in the mornings with my coffee and watch them work. All that purposeful, unhurried movement. And I think that there is something to be said for creatures who know exactly what they're doing and do it without apology. I'm still learning. I keep coming back to that Sunday. The one I spent alone at my workbench with a piece of sandpaper and a rocking chair that didn't need me to explain myself to it. I didn't go to pieces. I didn't make calls I'd regret. I just worked with my hands the way I always have when the world gets loud and complicated. And somewhere in that quiet I made a decision that had nothing to do with anger. And everything to do with clarity. That's the thing about getting older that nobody warns you about. You stop having the patience for self-deception. You see things as they are, not as you wish they were. And once you see clearly, you're responsible for what you do with that sight. What my son-in-law did wasn't just a legal matter. It was a revelation. It told me something about the years leading up to it, the small exclusions, the managed distances, the way I'd been quietly sorted into the category of tolerable when convenient. I'd let that happen, not out of weakness exactly, but out of love for my daughter and a belief that patience was the right instrument for the situation. Maybe it was. Maybe it bought time that needed to be bought. I don't know. What I know is that when the moment came that actually required me to act, I acted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the kind of deliberate follow-through that my father would have recognized. There's something I've come to believe about how consequences actually work in a life. They're not random. They accumulate every choice a person makes, to be honest or dishonest, to show up or to manage people out of rooms, to build something real or to take shortcuts through someone else's foundation. Those choices stack up quietly over time and eventually, they become the architecture of your circumstances. My son-in-law built something over years that he thought was invisible. It wasn't. It just hadn't been examined yet. And I've had to look at my own stack too. The times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. The times I absorbed disrespect because I thought absorbing it was the same as rising above it. It isn't. Dignity isn't passive. That's what I got wrong for longer than I'd like to admit. Real integrity, the kind that holds when things get hard, isn't just about being a decent person in easy moments. It's about knowing your own worth clearly enough that you don't volunteer to be diminished, and having the discipline to respond to betrayal through legitimate means rather than letting hurt turn into something uglier. That discipline is what kept me out of trouble in December. I didn't confront my son-in-law. I didn't call my daughter in the middle of the night and unload everything I was feeling. I worked within systems that exist for exactly this kind of situation. The FTC, my bank, my attorney. And I let those systems do what they're designed to do. That restraint wasn't weakness. It was the hardest thing I did through all of it. My daughter is still figuring out what her life looks like now. I don't rush that. I just keep the porch light on and the coffee ready. The rocking chair sits out back. I built it to last.